Welcome. Today is Monday and the second day of the first week of Advent. The Advent candle is lit. We're reading Tabitha's Travels, and today's chapter is titled Lost Lambs. Help! Tabitha heard the scream again and sucked in her breath. The cry was faint, but full of fear. Jehovah, save me! The voice echoed. As if lightning had struck the camp, everyone looked up in shock, staring toward the road. Save me! The high-pitched voice screeched, and this time it was clear that it came from the canyon. At once, Eliakim dropped the hammer he was using to stake down a tent and sprang to his feet. Tabitha watched from the other side of the valley as her father clambered up the short hill to the road. Before she could even think of it, her own feet were running across the meadow, dodging tents and fires and camels. Others were running toward the road as well, Tabitha saw. Other men, she noted with disgust. The women mostly cowered behind the tents or held their children in check. As for Tabitha, she knew a genuine cry for help when she heard one, and would not hesitate to go to someone in need. But then she skidded to a stop and stared as her father emerged from the canyon. In his arms he carried a small boy dressed in the tunic of a shepherd, and she saw blood dripping from the back of the boy's head. Gulping down her shock, Tabitha forced her feet to move again. By the time she reached her father's side, he had laid the boy gently on the grass, the shadow of his head shading the boy's face. Tabitha held her breath, wondering if the boy was dead. He looked to be about her own age of 10, and seemed to have the face of an angel. But a dirty angel, Tabitha thought. His clothes were covered in the dust of the road, and his face smeared with sweat and mud. Without a word, Tabitha reached into her goatskin bag and pulled out a pad of cloth. Handing it to her father, he placed it under the boy's head to stop the bleeding. I called out to him, and he fell, her father explained. He hit his head on a rock. A moment later, the boy moaned, and his eyes fluttered open. The boy seemed startled and tried to scramble away. Eliakim held him by the shoulders and said, There, little one, be at peace. The boy calmed and laid his head back down. I heard you calling the name of Jehovah, Eliakim said gently, and so I came. The boy squinted in the face of Tabitha's father. He opened his mouth to speak, batting his eyes against the sun, but no words would come out. Finally, his voice squeaky and raspy at the same time, the boy spoke. You're an angel of the Lord, he said, and he lifted a wobbly arm and touched Eliakim's cheek. Eliakim smiled broadly and chuckled. No, little one, I am no angel. Then he moved to the side to help the boy sit up, and blinding sunlight slapped the boy square in the face. He let out a little yelp and put his hand up to shade his eyes. The sun, he whispered hoarsely. The sun made your hair glow like... Shh. I understand, Eliakim said, but you must rest. I will carry you back to our camp. As powerful arms lifted him from the ground again, a mountain of tension seemed to drain from the boy, and he instantly fell asleep against Eliakim's shoulder. Tabitha, he whispered to his daughter, fetch water, bread, and fruit. Bring it to our tent. Tabitha nodded, then lifted her tunic to free her feet and ran toward the cook tent. Her mother saw her coming and yelled out in frustration, Tabitha, you look like a boy running like that. Breathing hard and fast, Tabitha skidded to a stop in front of her mother. I'm sorry, Mother, she gasped, but Father has found a small boy who has been injured and sent me for food and water. A boy? Tabitha's mother exclaimed, even as she turned to fill her husband's request. How did he come to be in such a place? Was he alone? Tabitha took the bread and pomegranate that her mother held out, and then grabbed a skin of water hanging from the tent frame. I do not know, she answered as she turned away, but we have seen no one else on the road. With that, Tabitha was off on a dead run again, the food and water huddled in her arms. From behind her she heard her mother scolding again. Tabitha, don't run. The boy will live while you keep a proper. But then the voice was gone, lost among the sounds of the caravan animals. Tabitha knew what her mother was saying, though, since she'd heard it many times before. She knew that girls were supposed to remain quiet and dignified. But what use was it to have good running legs if you never let them run? A crowd had gathered around Eliakim and the boy now, who was lying on a mat in front of the main tent. Tabitha's father took the skin of water from her and poured a few drops into the boy's mouth. The boy didn't stir. Then Tabitha knelt down and held the warm bread under his nose. Her father took the bread and waved it back and forth so that every breath the boy took would be filled with the bread's aroma. A moment later, the boy's eyes fluttered open. The boy's eyes grew wide as he spied the bread, and then, without warning, he snapped at it like a hungry dog jumping at a piece of meat. His mouth took such a big bite of the bread that he also got one of Eliakim's fingers, nipping the end of it. Ow! Eliakim cried. Careful, little one, he said, shaking his hand quickly to stop the pain. I know you are hungry, but we have better things to eat than my fingers. Still without a word, the boy chomped down the piece of bread, and then another held out by Tabitha. When Tabitha held out the pomegranate, she thought the boy's eyes would pop right out of his head. He grabbed the fruit and dove straight into it, its juices dribbling across his chin and down his neck. Finally, the boy began to slow down and chew the last few bites of the fruit. He looked up for the first time, turning his head this way and that to see all the people around him. Shepherds, he said after a moment. You are shepherds. Eliakim smiled and said, That is true, as so too are you, if I be any judge. Yes, sir, the boy answered politely. I am Jotham of Jericho, defender of the lambs of my father. And I, Tabitha's father said, am Eliakim, son of Abijah. And who is your father, Jotham of Jericho? He is Asa, son of Jacob, the boy said, drawing his shoulders up square and straight. Eliakim frowned and stroked his beard. Asa, son of Jacob. I believe I know that name. He thought for a moment and then shook his head. Ah, well, if I have heard that name, I have long forgotten where. But now tell me, why is Jotham of Jericho out on the highway all alone? Where is your caravan? The boy's face seemed to get even dirtier as he dropped his gaze to the ground and wrinkled up his forehead. Well, you see, I was out in the wilderness watching my sheep far from my father's camp, and a lion came. Yes, a lion, and it killed one of my sheep. And then I chased it. I chased the lion across many hills, but finally I caught it. Yes, I did, and I killed it with my sling. I hit it with a rock right between its eyes, and it dropped dead. Jotham paused for a moment, and Tabitha thought it looked like he was trying to decide what happened next. Just as she had so many times before, she felt her heart melt at the thought of someone in trouble. But also, as she had many times before, she felt another feeling, the feeling that the boy was lying. By the time I got to my flock, the boy finished his story, my parents had already been there and left. They must have thought that the lamb's blood was mine and thought I was dead. They built a small burial marker with rocks and put my name on top. Anyhow, Jotham said with a sigh, they left without me. And now I am alone, and I must find them. Eliakim stroked his beard for a moment and then said, So the great hunter kills a lion with his bare hands and then finds fear in the rocks of a canyon? Tabitha saw the boy gulp hard. and knew that her father had the same suspicions as she. Well, I was very hungry, and everything looked so strange, and I. Eliakim smiled again and patted the boy's shoulder. And you called on the name of Jehovah, which is when I came running to help and startled you. Jotham lowered his head and nodded. Tabitha could feel the shame inside him, and knew he felt guilty for the lie he had told. And now, Eliakim said, looking around, you have new friends to help you find your family, and if you need it, you now have a new family. Jotham raised his head again, a smile stretching from ear to ear. Then everyone introduced themselves, and Tabitha waited her turn. First was Uncle Hazba, then Uncle Ananias, and several aunts and her older brothers. The list seemed endless, but as she waited patiently, Tabitha heard something shocking. Eliakim, she heard her Uncle Ananias hiss toward her father. This was the uncle Tabitha did not like much, the one who seemed to only be concerned with himself. I must speak with you, brother, Ananias hissed again. Tabitha watched as Eliakim turned his attention to his younger brother. What is it? She heard him say. Moving his mouth close to his older brother's ear, Tabitha's uncle whispered, That boy is evil. We must get rid of him at once. Our God is a God of surprises. Just when you think everything is going normally, God steps in, and it's time to shake things up a bit. A new job, a new school, new responsibilities. Maybe it's His way of letting us know He's in control. Or maybe He just wants to see if we really trust Him. Either way, our response must be immediate and obedient. Yes, Lord, is the way we must answer. Whatever you say, you are in charge. Tabitha was just settling in for another normal day when that day was suddenly interrupted. Mary was also having an ordinary day when suddenly her life changed. In the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. That's what Luke tells us in the Bible. If you're expecting a routine Christmas this year, maybe you're missing the point. Maybe you're missing the fact that any time we celebrate Jesus, miracles happen.